Okay, it says we are live. So real quick, I'm not gonna be long tonight. It's about 10:30 at night in California, and I'm on the West Coast. So it's like what 1:30 in the morning on the East Coast. So I know not many people gonna be up watching this, but this was a burning desire. It was on my mind. I just wanted to do this live stream and drop this receipt. Right. Um, Topic is Africans seafaring people, and no, not West Africans or Central Africans. They weren't, and I will prove that, and it's okay. So the Africans facing the Atlantic Ocean, and I know I've been strict saying this. Um, so when I say were the Africans seafaring, and I say no, um, to be particular, let me just say the Africans on the Atlantic coast, on the West Coast. Now you had Africans in East Africa, like the Horn of Africa, who were influenced by Islam and things of that nature. They did trade through the Indian Ocean and ended up in India, and we'll go over that. So bear with me for 4 minutes, and I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna set everything up and my sound is okay. And we're gonna kill this question of the Africans being seafaring, right? Um, a lot of wishful thinking and um, a lot of people just not understanding strict history. Too much romanticizing. So I'm here to bring clarity. So I don't want to be here all night. I'm going to get to it, stick to the topic, and then I'm going to play a brief 4 minute video afterwards, and we're out of here. So let's do this real quick. Okay, so something about sound is not right. Let me fix my sound. Okay, so something about sound is not right. Let me fix my sound. One second, people.
I came home late, you were not there. I didn't care. I think we both know it's over. We need to let it go. I came home late, you were not there. I didn't care. I think we both know
All
it's
right.
over. We need to let it go. We need to let it go. We need to let it go. Both know it's over. We need to let it go. I can't believe we at a point where we don't like each other's company when you're not around. The burdens off my shoulders. We've tried, but it won't get revived. And I got too much life to live. I gave all I can give me why. I wait, who will be first to say let me go? I came home late, you were not there. I didn't care. I think we both know it's over. We need to let it go. We need to let.
All right, let's get into this. Let's get into this. What's good, JPTV? Oh, I got Tank on that one. So check it out. The title says, "Were Africans seafaring people, and why not?" So we're going to answer, were they? Then we're going to answer, why not? Right? So I want to define seafaring because the people got it confused. It doesn't mean that you're on a raft or a canoe and you're sailing along the coast. Hey JPTV, if you can hear me good, hit the number 8. Right? I want to make sure my voice is. Anybody listen to me? Hit the number 8 if you can hear me well. I think. Let me take it. Okay, I'm good. Right? So it doesn't mean you just on some raft and you're in a canoe. You know what I mean? Sailing along the coast. Seafaring meaning taking a sailing vessel and getting up out there and doing commerce and trade and or colonizing and invading and just visiting other places outside of what you would call where you reside, or your tribe, or your country, your state, or what have you, right? So let me just define it. And all right, thank you, JPTV. So let me just define it real quick, and we're gonna move forward. Technically, they call it seafaring people or seafaring nation. That technically is just a maritime nation, right? Let me blow this up. Right? Technically, that's just what it is, a maritime nation. So, a maritime nation is any nation that borders the sea and is dependent on its use for the majority of the following state activities, right? And what are those activities? Commerce and transport, war, to define a territorial boundary, or for any maritime activity. Activities using the sea to convey or produce an end result, right? Historically, the term has been used to refer to thalassocracy, and we're going to look that up, such as Carthage and Phoenicia. But during medieval period, increasingly became associated with maritime republics, and they just list a few: Venice, Pisa, Genoa, right? So what it is, I keep screwing his name up when I say it. Thalassocracy, excuse me, thalassocracy, right? Let's define that. Here we go, right? Thalassocracy. Let me make this a little smaller, but I'm gonna read it. I hope you guys can see it. Okay, here we go. Sometimes also a maritime empire, right? So we're not just talking about floating on a raft or a canoe along the shores of your area or your habitation, right? We're talking a little deeper when you say seafaring people, right? Sometimes called a maritime empire, is a state with primarily maritime realms, an empire at sea, right? Or a seaborne empire, right? Traditional thalassocracies seldom dominate interiors. They don't just fuck around interior with themselves, right? They go out and fuck with other people, right? Um, Okay, so it says they seldom dominate interiors, even in their home territories. Example of this were Phoenician states, Tyre, Sidon, Carthage, the Italian maritime republics of Venice and Genoa of the Mediterranean. They just listed some Shola dynasties, and on and on. Omani Empire, Arabia, Austronesian empires, just on and on, right? Um, Phylacracies can thus be distinguished from traditional empires, where a state's territories, though possibly linked principally or solely by the sea lanes, generally extend into mainland territories. Okay, so we're just not talking about no fly by night floating along a canoe. Are we clear? Okay, next, just a little conversation and give you an understanding, right? Let's just read through this to give you some other viewpoints. Okay? First of all, about 500 years ago, Europeans started the exploration and conquest by sea. And that's actually called the Age of Discovery, which we're going to go about. So just follow me, breathe. I'm going to make it plain. Um, 500 years ago, Europeans started the exploration and conquest by sea. However, European nations such as the Spanish and Portuguese, because Portuguese advanced shipbuilding technology, to be able to cross large body oceans, which I'm just ad libbing myself. Real quick, just so you understand, Portuguese advanced shipbuilding technology in the late 1300s and made ships durable and advanced enough to cross large body oceans. And that's when human trafficking across large body oceans began and never before. Understand that. Okay? Um, However, European nations such as the Spanish and the Portuguese didn't just invent the caravels and their transatlantic ships out of thin air. This technology that has been evolving from Greco Roman times and possibly even before that, that finally culminated the grand and imposing ships used for exploration and colonization. And ask, why did this not happen in Africa? Why were there no African seafaring people, this asks, that explored and colonized other parts? Why is this only a European thing? What made the Europeans want to explore and colonize but not the Africans? Right? Run that through your brain real quick. I'm going to answer it for you. Um, as I said when I started, I wanted to be clear because I always said Africans weren't seafaring people. But East Africans in the Horn were, that were influenced by Arabs and Islam, just to be clear, right? Because people have been combating me with that, right? And I understand that, right? They were going through the Indian Ocean. But that's different. We are West and Central Africans, and actually South Africans weren't seafaring in ancient times. But let's just go ahead. Um, Well, to start off, you're going to have to specify which Africans it says because Africans peoples on the eastern seaboard, such as the Swahili and Somalis, were definitely maritime cultures. Hold on. What up, baby? I'm live. I'm gonna call you back. All right. We're definitely the maritime cultures who participated in the greater Indian Ocean trade. That's on the eastern side of Africa. Uh, 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 um, so it's basically saying right here, like I said, he's gonna assume you mean people of African descent on the Atlantic side, right? So continuing on, let me keep this moving. So, and we're going to get into this. I just want to blow this up so you can see it. Atlantic Africa does not have these same geographic features, right? African nations definitely had rivers and coastal fleets along the coast, but going across the Atlantic Ocean was a daunting task, right? So West Africans and Africans on the Atlantic coast didn't have anywhere to seafare to. Sub-Saharan Africa is basically landlocked. There's nowhere to go. You don't have interaction with other peoples like in the Mediterranean, where the Mediterranean world can fuck with each other and sail around and exchange ideas and do trade and do business. That couldn't happen in sub-Saharan Africa because it's about the geography and where it's located. I wish you guys would get a map when we having certain discussions to make it clear to you visually, and you'd be like, "Oh, okay, I see what you're saying." Look, so when you're looking at a map and you see the Atlantic coast of Africa, there's nowhere to sail to. You can't seafare to no one. They only stayed along the coast in canoes, just like the Native Americans. Sub-Saharan Africans and Native American has canoes. They didn't do seafaring things. And it's okay. There's many more people like that. Okay? Um, let me keep moving. So it says why the Portuguese? Because they were good sailors located at the very ass end of Eurasian African trade routes. The Portuguese was positioned in a great place. They can do trade and business in the Mediterranean, and on their eastern side, they can sail and do seafaring activities along the Atlantic coast, thus going to West Africa. You get it? We're going to unfold this history with the proper chronology. Northern Europeans didn't even bother, they just traded with each other. But the Portuguese couldn't just ignore all the riches being passed around the Med, or the Mediterranean. They were trying to find a route around all Andalusian, Catalan, Occitan, Italian, Greek, Turkish, and Egyptian middlemen that dominated the trade. So in ancient times, we're not talking about ancient times, let me just be clear. Right? But Egypt at one point, Egypt is a Mediterranean country. So at one point, Egyptians were considered the preeminent force in the Mediterranean as far as doing trade and doing business. People in the Mediterranean world are the Greco-Roman world, the ancient Egyptians, and most in all North African countries, right? Turkey, right there in the Levant, in that little corner. These are Mediterranean peoples who shared ideas, similar foods, and did trade and business with each other for thousands of years. And this is why when you had certain other conquerors of ancient Egypt, they were, guess what? Mediterranean people. Greeks, Romans. They had been doing trade and business with each other for years. So they got to know each other. You just don't run up on nobody and invade them. You've been fucking with each other for 1,000 years first. Right? All right. So basically it's just round out said anyways, just so you can see. There's not much evidence of seafaring West African state. The big empires of West Africa were all what? Inland states. Think about it. The big empires of West Africa were all inland states, usually located along the Niger River. Even the smaller polites of West Africa seem to be fairly inland. focus. The Portuguese trading posts in West Africa don't seem to have been opposed by anybody apart from the locals whose houses were literally torn down to make space for a fort, right? So even here it says in East Africa, though, which is different, traders were quite active in the Indian Ocean, right? Zanzibar and all that occult stuff, and then Muslims. So let's just continue on, and we're gonna move on to the next. We're gonna make this clear today. Mm, it says Portugal had a stable and successful government throughout many years, right? Um, Let me just skip that. I don't want to be too long. All right, here one is a person is saying Egyptians were seafaring more for trade than colonization, right? So everyone knows in academia that African seafaring cultures were on the Indian Ocean, not the Atlantic. Let me just blow that up so you can see and understand. You got to understand this. And it's okay. Africa's seafaring cultures were on the Indian Ocean, not on the Atlantic. They were trading with Asia, which is what the Europeans wanted to do in the first place. Okay, so we're going to move on from this. I don't want to go there yet. Hold on. So, right here, Africans in India, from slaves to reformers and rulers, right? This painting shows a reservoir built by Abyssinian eunuch in the 17th century. So you see, as it says Abyssinia, meaning it's an older word for Ethiopian. So it was Horners, not West and Central Africans, that were in boat with Islam at times, and they did trade in the Indian Ocean, right? Abyssinia, you see? Oops, bear with me. Okay, so we read right here India and Africa have shared history and trade. Let me just blow this up so we can all see. India and Africa have shared history in trade, music, religion, arts, and architecture. But the historical link between these two diverse regions is rarely discussed. Rarely discussed. Many Africans traveled to India as what? Slaves and traders. This had a lot of the interaction in Africans being outside of Africa happens. A lot of it is through slave trade. And this is just the history, and it's okay. Many Africans traveled to India as slave trades and traders, but eventually settled down here to play an important role in India's history of kingdoms, conquest, and wars. Some of them, like who? Malik Ambar, right? Which is an Arabic name, so he was probably an Arabized or Islamic African, right? Islam influenced Africa big time. I'm just talking outside of this right now, right? So there was an argument online the other day, and people was trying to argue that Islam didn't help sub-Saharan Africa or change sub-Saharan Africa or improve it. Some people thought it harmed it. Well, they think that because of the slave trade, the tra- the Saharan trade, right? The Arab slave trade, right? But they also have to understand that with a lot of that, language and writing came to sub-Saharan Africa. Communication changed, right? Well, that's another story. But anyway, um, went on to become important rulers and military strategists. Armbar was known for taking on the powerful Mughal rulers of northern India. An exposition organized by the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture of the New York Public Library in Delhi recently showcased such forgotten stories of Africa's role in India's history. But be mindful of what Africa they're talking about, right? Abyssinians, which are Africans, but they're not you. Also known as Habishis in India, mostly came from the Horn of Africa to the subcontinent. Dr. Sylvain Diaf of the Schoenberg Center says Africans were successful in India because of their military prowess and administrative skills. African men were employed in various specialized jobs as soldiers, place guards, or bodyguards. You were help, right? They were able to rise through the ranks, and some of them became rise through the ranks and became important people, such as life to become generals, admirals, and administrators, she said. So this is a painting. I have it down here, so let me show just to make it a little bigger. Right? So in this painting, you can see in India, they got some black folk up in here, right? Let's make it bigger. You see? Sprinkled through there, a little salt and pepper, right? In smaller numbers, but you're there, right? It seems like the Africans in the back, right? And I don't know if they're Africans, but it seems that some in the back have no shirts or clothes on, right? You see? I always look at how the different people dress. Why is this one dressed different than the other, right? So it shows that if some sprinkled black folk, maybe Ethiopians, who knows? Well, this article is talking about Ethiopians, so yeah, or Horners, let's just say, not Ethiopians, because y'all mind might go to today's Ethiopian. But hold on. So let's move that. Let's continue on. Um, Africans were an integral part of several Indian sultanates, and of them even started their own dynasties, right? Early evidence suggests that Africans came to India as early as the 4th century, but they really flourished as traders, artists, rulers, architects, and reformers between the 14th and 17th century, right? That's when they really flourished, right? So you see them up here. I'm trying to get the art history. So these are like workers for the sultan or for the royalty, right? So let me move on. We're going to keep this brief tonight, not too long. Um, right? This painting right here is supposed to show an Indian. Let me see, what does it say? This painting is from 1590, right? Let's get chronology together. Shows an Indian prince eating in the land of Ethiopians. Or what? East Africans, right? We're not East Africans. Get that through your head. All right. And they all have a sultan or a head cat. Okay, next, let's do this. The age of discovery, right? The age of discovery is a period. Let's just give the definition, not just my definition. The age of discovery or age of exploration, right? Part of the early modern period and largely overlapping with the age of sail, right? Was a period from approximately 15th century. So when you hear 15th century, they're talking about the years 1400s, right? 1400s to the 16th century in European history, during which what? Seafaring Europeans explored, colonized, and conquered regions across the globe. When you're seafaring, you're taking care of business. You're exploring, you're colonizing, you're doing shit, you're getting into shit. You up out there and you're doing shit outside of your own place. Right? The extensive overseas exploration with the Portuguese and Spanish at the what? Forefront. Because why? Portuguese are the people who advanced shipbuilding technology to be able to cross large body oceans before anyone, before Arabs, before anyone. Certain people developed certain things. Okay. Later, the Dutch kicked it off. The Dutch was bad in the motherfucking shipbuilding technology, right? The Portuguese and Spanish at the forefront, later joined by the Dutch, English, and French, emerged as a powerful factor in European culture, most notably the European colonization of the Americas. Right? It also marks an increased adoption of colonialism as a government policy in several European states. As such, it is sometimes synonymous with first wave of European colonization. European exploration outside the Mediterranean started with maritime expeditions of Portugal to the Canary Islands in 1336. And later with the Portuguese discoveries of the Atlantic, such and such and such and such. And then later the coast of West Africa in 1434, I guess they touched first. And the establishment of the sea route in India, right? The main event of the Age of Discovery was when Spain made the transatlantic voyage of Christopher Columbus between 1492 and 1504. Okay, follow the chronology. Later on in 1519, 1522, right? Do I need to keep going? I'm just letting you know the definition of the Age of Discovery, right? Sometimes they call it the Age of Exploration. There was no Age of Discovery and no Age of Exploration with sub-Saharan Africans. Always been landlocked. It's geography what sets people apart. It's where you're located. Geography, where you're geographically located, depends on how you're influenced in the world. If I'm located in Egypt or Rome or Portugal, I'm doing business and trade with all of them people in the Mediterranean world, all them different peoples, different ideologies, exchanging ideas, people doing this, doing that. Sub-Saharan Africa didn't have that. They didn't have nowhere to sell to. It's a big old empty ocean right there. They didn't have no shipbuilding technology. They had canoes. Native American had canoes. They never seen no ships until one ran up on them. Native Americans ain't had no examples until one ran up on them. Same with Western Central Africa. They didn't know until one ran up on them. And when one ran up on them, it wasn't no hostile shit for some 100 years. People were getting to know each other. You had early Europeans sitting back watching Africans enslave Africans. They was doing it. They said, "Hey, shit. Well, can we get some slaves? Let's do some business." Shit cracked off. But let's get back to topic. Y'all don't want to hear them real talk. All right, so here we go right here. Let me share my screen again. Bam. Iberian ship development. Okay. Due to centuries of constant conflict, warfare, and daily life in the Iberian Peninsula were interlinked. Small, lightly equipped armies were maintained at all times. The near constant state of war resulted in a need for maritime experience. It called for a good old maritime experience, and they built on shit, right? Ship technology, power, and organization. This led the crowns of Aragon, Portugal, and later the. Let me get the whole thing in here. Let me make it smaller. Okay. Okay. So here we go. Due to what? Like I said, the geography is important. Due to geography, Iberian countries had greater access to the sea than did much of Europe. Portuguese, their geographical location gave them a greater access. They can fuck around in the Mediterranean and on the Atlantic coast of West Africa. They had it good both ways. It's where you're situated, right? This allowed the Iberian kingdoms to become a people of mariners and trade. It is what it is. Other people weren't that at this time, except in the Mediterranean, right? These people had the motivation to move, and they were close to the wealth of what? Africa and the Mediterranean, strategically located. These people had the motivation to move. They were close to the wealth of Africa and the Mediterranean. Expansion and development of ship technology were due to commercial, military, and religious endeavors. By 1411, Portugal was no longer fighting Castile. In 1415, it conquered Ceuta, its first overseas colonies. 1415 is when it conquered its first overseas colony. 1415. They hadn't even got to Ghana by then, at that time yet. So they're advancing 1415. Then it just comes on. It just they keep advancing. The Crusades cemented trade and external alliances. Portugal wanted to protect its coast from Muslim raids because them Arabs was fucking around in the Mediterranean. Them Arabs was around. North Africa was Islamic, right? So Portuguese is right next to North Africa. They were able to attack Muslim commerce while taking part in the trade of gold, what? Gold, slaves, and ivory. As a seafaring people in the southwesternmost region of Europe, the Portuguese became natural leaders of exploration during the Middle Ages. Faced with options of either accessing European markets by the sea, by exploiting its seafaring prowess, or by land and facing tasks of the crossing. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Okay? We got it? In 1434, the first consignment of African slaves was brought to Lisbon. Portuguese explorers sailed the coast of Africa, establishing trade posts for several tradable commodities as firearms, spices, gold, silver, slaves, right? You see where it says firearms, right? So this is why I tell people, they was trading firearms with West Africans. They weren't going inland. Anybody going in there was their own Africans snatching up their own people and bringing them to the coast because you can barely park on the goddamn coast. They didn't have ports like that. The Africans get in their canoes and bring niggas out to them. Upfront business. All up on board. Now, ain't wasn't nobody going through there snatching nobody. You ain't going through no motherfucking jungles in tropical Africa trying to snatch somebody. You don't know the territory when they sitting there armed with firearms. Asante had firearms. These niggas was strapped. Fuck is you talking about? Shit. Right? Portuguese were able to have unique evolution of ships because they were on a geographical crucial land area, one that was literally a hinge between northern and southern waters. Right? So I can go on and on and on to why Iberian ship development happened 1400 to 1600, right? Let's continue on. It also tells you what was important for shipbuilding and how to get around, and it talked about this is how you know about seafaring people, because seafaring people develop what? Maps, cartography. Here we go. Sub-Saharan Africans didn't have writing. They began to be given writing when Islam hit them. Way over in East Africa, Nubians developed writing dealing with the Caucasoid Egyptians. They later developed Morocco. They were influenced. But far as like Central and West Africa, and that, they didn't have no writing. They didn't have maps. They weren't cartographists. Okay, that's just what that is. Look, let's just define it so you understand. Cartography, right? Sheet of paper, map, right, is a study and practice of making and using maps. Combining what? Science, aesthetics, and technique. Cartography builds on the premise that it just breaks it down talking about it's just building maps, right? And you got to have science. You got to know. You know what I mean? Africans didn't do this, right? So we break all this down, set maps again. Okay, let me just keep going on. It just breaks down the history of these ancient maps and cartography. Is this the one? Look, this is an old ancient map, the Badolina map. Oops. Look at these old maps and shit, right? Cartography, right? So we're showing improvement about who was seafaring and who wasn't. I'm dropping fact after fact so you can get an understanding. We have to stop the nonsense, right? This is an old map, 1154 time. Look at this shit. Cartography. People are exploring and writing and jotting down shit and figuring out shit and applying science, right? You heard them. So I'm just giving you an example, some old maps and what cartography is. That's so you know who seafaring people is. Who had cartography, who didn't. Okay, moving on. I broke down the age of discovery already. All right. Then later on, well, hot damn. You have what? Steam powered during the Industrial Revolution. Now, y'all know sub Saharan Africans didn't really have no steam power in this kind of revolution. Fucking with motors and steams and, steam engines and shit. Oh, when did this jump off? Improvements to the steam engine were some of the most important technologies of the Industrial Revolution, although steam did not replace water power in importance in Britain until after the Industrial Revolution. From Englishman Thomas such and such, atmospheric engine, I guess. Thomas Newcomb, I guess he had an atmospheric engine of 1712. Damn. Through major developments by Scottish inventor and mechanical engineer, blah 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 blah. Right. So then the steam engine came. Right. You can't show me no Africans with no steam engine. You can't prove none of this I'm showing you right now regarding sub-Saharan Africans and being any kind of seafaring people. In 1776, Watt formed an engine building and engineering excuse me, I read that all wrong. In 1776, Watt formed an engine building and engineering partnership with manufacturer Matthew. Right? This is giving you a little history, right? Thomas Savory's steam pump, right? West Central Africans didn't have no steam pumps. Come on, y'all. Let's stop. They started this shit in the 1700s. And guess what was going on? Still slavery. What do you mean we're the slave ships? Shit. Now, I want to end this video with this. This is very important to understand. It gives you an understanding of the geography. Now, I've did about 3-4 videos with this specific video I'm about to play. But people just forget and don't get it, so I just want to remind you. Let's go.
In a strictly geographical sense, all the peoples on the continent of Africa are Africans, from the whites of South Africa to the Arabs of the Mediterranean states. But the term has in practice come to refer primarily to the indigenous peoples of Africa below the Sahara, to black Africans. The basis for this focus is not simply racial, but historic, cultural, and geographic as well. As with the British, the Slavs, and others, the influence of geography in Africa has not been simply in its effects primarily.
Pause. Now, this is just a 4 minute video, but this is a powerful 4 minute video. If you just really listen, it's going to make you say, I get it now.
On things. The term
Listen.
has in practice come to refer primarily to the indigenous peoples of Africa below the Sahara, to black Africans. The basis for this focus is not simply racial, but historic, cultural, and geographic as well. As with the British, the Slavs, and others, the influence of geography in Africa has not been simply in its effects primarily on things, natural resources or economic prosperity, for example, but on people. More specifically, the effect of geography in making cultural interactions more difficult has
Bam! Listen, do you hear what he just said? The effect of geography, which makes cultural interactions difficult. If the Egyptians can interact with Greeks, Romans, Turks, Levant people, Canaan, and all but 15 other damn people, and you can't interact with nobody, who's going to be influenced? Who's going to thrive more? Who's going to have more? Right? This is the psychology of it. This is so in the conscious community, you'll rarely ever have people have a discussion about the geography of Africa and how geography made progress happen to certain groups. Because when you do that, you'll understand that hell, we didn't progress because of this. And then you can't romanticize as much when you get deep down into it. Reality hits you. So this is why I also say it's not that anyone's more intelligent because humans are 99.9% alike. It's just certain areas and certain people have gotten influenced differently and became more scientifically literate because of their influence. Some people were landlocked and aren't able to do. Like you go to the isolated islands of Tasmania. They're isolated so they don't. You go to the Amazon jungles in Brazil. They're isolated so they don't advance because they're not exchanging ideas with people. They just, amongst their own, stagnant.
been particularly striking as between the peoples of several on people. More specifically, the effect of geography in making cultural interactions more difficult has been particularly striking as between the peoples of sub-Saharan Africa and the outside world, as well as among themselves. To their north is a desert more vast than the continental United States, and to the east, west, and south are the Indian, Atlantic, and Antarctic Oceans. Moreover, the smooth coastline of sub-Saharan Africa has offered few harbors which ocean-going ships could enter, and
Paul, see, a lot of people don't know this. It offered few harbors that people can even stop and go to. Just listen, just listen.
in many places African and Antarctic Oceans. Moreover, the smooth coastline of sub-Saharan Africa has offered few harbors which ocean-going ships could enter, and in many places the shallow coastal waterways have meant that large ships could not get near the shores. Ironically, for centuries, much of the world's international trade was carried in ships that sailed past West Africa on their way between Europe and Asia around the southern tip of the continent. Seldom did they stop. Partly this was a result of wind and ocean currents that made return trips between Europe and sub-Saharan Africa difficult, or not economically feasible in the era of wind-driven ships, at least until far greater knowledge of those currents and of alternative routes developed. Relatively little of Africa's trade entered international commerce. In the era before
Whoa. Did you hear what he just said? If, like, this is how Haiti remained poor. When they got sanctioned after that Haitian Revolution, they weren't able to do business on the world stage and do trade. People didn't fuck with them. So they became stagnant and poor, even though they kicked the French ass and got their freedom, per se. You get what I'm saying? So just listen.
Africa's trade entered international alternative routes developed. Relatively little of Africa's trade entered international commerce.
Pause. So sub-Saharan Africans, when the Mediterranean world and they doing all this exploration, you wasn't able to do shit and trade with nobody. Who with who? Look around you. It's no islands around you on the Atlantic coast. There's nothing to do business and trade with. You're either on the coast or you're inland.
In the era before the modern transportation revolution of railroads, automobiles, and planes, which is to say throughout most of human history, the geographical barriers surrounding tropical Africa have been formidable, though not absolutely impenetrable. The consequences have been not only economic but cultural. As the eminent French historian Fernand Braudel put it, external influence filtered only very slowly, drop by drop, into the vast African continent south of the Sahara.
Bam! You're talking about the sub-Saharan Africans. That's a powerful thing he just said. Listen.
Fernand Braudel put it, external influence filtered only very slowly, drop by drop, into the vast African continent south of the Sahara. The geographic barriers to economic and cultural exchanges within various regions of sub-Saharan Africa have been formidable as well. The most striking of these barriers has been a dearth of navigable rivers or streams, though the land itself also presents difficult terrain in many places in the form of escarpments and rift valleys. The net effect has been that the peoples of sub-Saharan Africa have historically been insulated not only from the peoples and cultures of the outside world, but also from one another.
Bam! See, this is what when I try to talk about this, people are confused because they never had these kind of discussions. Chief X bring this shit to you. So did you hear what he just said? Not only are they not doing trade and business with the rest of the world, they're really not even doing trade and business with each other. They're so spaced out. So you're on isolation upon isolation. Who is these people, if they were inland, who are they going to be doing trade and business with? Now, it might not be another tribe for a long ways. And then if they do connect, they might not even be able to influence each other. So just, you got to understand, you got to think about this shit deeply.
From that the peoples of sub-Saharan Africa have historically been insulated not only from the peoples and cultures of the outside world, but also from one another.
That means you're landlocked. That's what it means. You're landlocked.
Among the cultural consequences has been a linguistic fragmentation of tropical Africa, which has made African languages 1/3 of all the languages of the world, even though African peoples are only about 10% of the world's population.
Let me stop there. You have to understand what he just basically is saying. The reason Africa has so many different languages is because they're disunited and spaced out and have never really been in unison. They're tribal. So you got so many goddamn languages, and when you should just have, a few. If you're connected with each other, but you're not connected with each other, so you're so many goddamn different languages. Let's go.
This linguistic fragmentation has been only one aspect of cultural fragmentation in general, including tribalism.
So what he just said, if you have a linguistic fragmentation, you're gonna have a tribal fragmentation. And some beefs and shit. You different than me. You talk different than me. We gonna bang on each other. I mean, you know what I mean?
And only one aspect of cultural fragmentation in general, including tribalism and many religious differences. In addition, a substantial portion of peoples of African ancestry today, 60 million, live in the Western Hemisphere, where they have absorbed the languages and cultures of Europeans. The imprint of Islamic civilization is also visible over large areas of sub-Saharan Africa, with the northern regions of some contemporary African states such as Nigeria, Sudan, and Tanzania being Islamic, and the southern part Christian or traditional in religion, with both non-African religions reflecting the influences of past conquerors. Black Africans became conquered peoples in two very different senses in different parts of the world, by territorial conquests and by massive enslavement. The conquerors and enslavers included other Africans, Arabs, and Europeans. Like so much of the history of Africa, these tragic events have been heavily influenced by the geography of the continent.
Thank you, Thomas Sowell, one of the most brilliant men. Thomas Sowell is brilliant. I tell people an economist, which he is, a PhD, is probably one of the most deepest and most intelligent intellectuals you can speak to or learn from. Because they get a historical context. They know about the trade, the business, the economies of different empires. They know about current day economy. I mean, an economist is a historian mixed with I don't know what to say. It's just a deep motherfucker. What's up, salute, y'all? So, this is what I wanted to say. So, hmm, so back to the title: Were Africans seafaring people? I think we've answered that question tonight. If that bothers you and make you mad that they weren't, let me be clear. East Africans and Horners were a bit seafaring during a certain time period in doing business in India and going through the Indian Ocean along the route. Let me make that clear. I'm talking about us. West and Central Africans were just not seafaring people. South Africans were not seafaring people. Go around the world. Brazilians were not seafaring people. It's okay. Brazil, when you get down, if you got a map and look at a map or you got a globe or something, there's nowhere to seafare to. You can go along the coast, right? Um, the Native Americans, the entire Western Hemisphere basically, was not a seafaring people or nation. They had canoes. They weren't part of the Industrial Revolution that made advancements, steam engines, and early boats that were able to reach other nations and colonies in the year 1417. What was it? The earliest one, right? Um, Three-fourths of the world, probably. Well, yeah. Let me just say, let's say three-fifths of the world were not seafaring people. Now, here's the thing, which you have to understand. It doesn't become a moral issue. So, this is what black Americans want to take an out on. They don't understand that they practiced slavery before the white man or the Arab internally. Because others became seafaring and were able to colonize and war and invade by sea. And just because you couldn't do all that, don't mean you wouldn't have. Don't mean you're just some better morally person that you just didn't because you didn't do that. You nope. So since what sub-Saharan Africans weren't seafaring, they would just invade each other inland. It's the same thing. Whether you invade your neighboring tribe in inland or whether you do it by sea, you're fucking invading. You're not off the hook. Everybody practiced slavery and was trying to enslave somebody or got enslaved. It don't matter if you're North African, you're Arab, you're African, you're European. Everyone was involved and that was just the way of the world. There were no labor laws. People were savage and didn't give a fuck. Things change and people get better over time. So whether you're African, whether you're European, whether you're North African, whether you're Arab, whatever you are, you practice slavery. And everybody's fucking guilty. No one's more morally better than the other. Some people just did it better. Don't hate. What you say, JP? JPTV? What you say? Blacks don't even like to swim, let alone sail. Now, if there people are saying African were seafaring people, all you got to do is drop a link. Show me the proof. Show me the boats. Show me the technology. Show me where they wrote about it. Show me where they talked about it. Show me where they drew maps and was into cartography. All the things I spoke of to me. Show me something, because you can't show me nothing. I went into different fields, cartography. I went into all kind of shit, and closed the case. Would you say Astro? Arabs brought a lot of Bantu slaves to the Middle East. Hmm. See, a lot of black folk got outside of Africa through a lot of slave trading. I'm gonna say this: a lot of blacks got outside of sub-Saharan Africa, even to North Africa and Europe and in the Levant and the Near East through slave trading shit. Not on your own merit. That's just history. You weren't seafaring and you weren't traveling people. I don't. I mean, I've been looking for this documentary for the longest. How in tropical Africa they stayed put. People did just hop up and leave and shit. People think everybody was just knew everything. Sub-Saharan Africans had no idea a pyramid even existed until modern times. How would they know? It's like I'm a Californian. I'm a Californian. We don't have no motherfucking hurricanes here. The fuck is that? So a Native American back in ancient times or whoever was in California didn't know nothing about no hurricanes. I wouldn't know if Florida, um, a hurricane ran through Florida and killed everybody and shit flooded in Louisiana. How the hell would I know? Unless it's modern times and there's some news and shit. And people are writing and sending kites and they got a mail system and shit. We wouldn't know. It's just like ancient Egyptians had no idea there was even a Western Hemisphere. People think that everybody just knew everything. Nope. Yes, they did, Astro. I did a documentary on Iraq, Palestine, and up in the Near East and the communities of black people they have. Right. So, I just had the burning desire to drop a presentation about who's seafaring and who isn't. What's the age of discovery? What is it not? Steamboats. What? Iberian ship development. I went on a whole. I broke down thalassography. Y'all forgot about that. A lot of y'all coming here late. I broke down what is a seafaring people. It's a maritime nation, right? I broke down the meaning of that. We went through it all. You know what I didn't touch on? Let me put this up. It says set that touch on. Let me, and we're gonna end it. This right here. It was a little article on some indigenous boats and some boats in Kenya, right? So like, if I can, let me see if I can make this bigger. Yeah. So, like a boat like this couldn't cross a large body ocean. Now, it's a decent boat along the coast, but if water would tear this shit up, right? And it's not covered, so water would flow all over this. Like when you're in the I was in the Navy, waves would flow all over this shit and drown everybody and flood this boat out, right? So let me move forward. This was indigenous boats, right? I was doing some research today, people. Chief X got you. This won't even blow up. Hold on. Can I expand this? I can expand the picture, but not this. Okay. And did my shit freeze? I got too many windows open. Okay, so they were just talking about some indigenous boats in the early 1900s, right? And maybe I'll go over that another day. So we went over a lot of things today, family. We went over the African and Indians and what kind of Africans and where they come from. Are they Horners? You know, who was who? Iberian ship development, cartography, right? The age of discovery, right? Steam powered power during the Industrial Revolution. I mean, we broke it all down. All right. So bottom line, let me just go to the comments. See if anybody got any questions. I don't see no questions or anything. But yeah, so um, anybody's in denial of Africans not being seafaring, they will be basically romanticizing history and making up shit. Tell them to drop a link and show you some sources. Never will happen. Peace out, y'all.